So using the camera to take your cake pictures gives you an advantage of having a high resolution image. But however, we will be able to take the good quality image using phones as well these days, where the technical stuffs in the phone is being taken care of by itself with a little bit of increasing the brightness and then reducing the brightness, which are user friendly using the phone. However, that becomes handy these days. However, if you have a DSLR and you want to use a DSLR to take the pictures of your cakes, then there are certain technical things that you need to understand before be able to take the right pictures. And the foremost thing that you need to understand is the exposure triangle, and there are three important things there, which is the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture. Now here I'm going to explain to you what these three things are and how technically important you need to understand to be able to change the value so you have the right exposure on the cake, which is the subject, to be able to actually take greater pictures using the camera. So the three important things when using the DSLR camera are the aperture, ISO, and the shutter speed. They form the exposure triangle like you see here. This is a pictorial representation to have a better understanding that I have just put here. So you can just start with the shutter speed. When you see the 1/1000 on the left side, which means there is a lesser light that is allowed in the camera, which means the shutter speed, the duration in which the lens is just going to be open and closed, is very, very less. So the value itself is less, which means the denominator value will be more. And now you go on to the right side, you see there is more light allowed in, and then the value is 1/60. And when there is the shutter that is being opened and closed, taking a longer period of time, will allow, I mean, it is just going to have your image getting blurred. And this shutter speed is mainly used for taking pictures of the moving objects. But here for the cake, we will be using to allow more light. When you are in a place where there is lesser light that is there when keeping the cake and taking the picture, and when you feel like it is dark, then you increase the shutter speed, so you allow more light to come in. And when the value is less, you know, the shutter is just going to click in like a fraction of a second, allowing lesser light to come. When the space itself that you're working is like really very well lit, then you use a lesser shutter speed. And now coming on to the ISO, when the ISO's value is more, you can see that there's 6400, and the image that is there, the mountain and the sun, you can see that it is getting very grainy. There is more light allowed in, and then the camera becomes too sensitive, and then it just gets the image getting very grainy. And when there is lesser light sent, which is like 100 or 200 around somewhere there, the image has the, during the daylight, the image just has the perfect clarity. But then when you are again using it in places where there is not enough light, then you adjust the ISO and move towards the higher value, trying to get in a lot of light, extra light that is specifically needed for the subject that you are taking. Now coming down to the aperture. Now when the value is lesser, f/2.8, which is the image on the top, you can see that the image, the tree, which is the subject, or in our case, it will be the cake. And that will be in more clarity, and the objects behind that particular subject, here is the tree, has more blurry effect. And this is very important when we are doing the deserts photography, the food photography, or sometimes even the cake when we are going to have some props behind the cake. Now, if we have the depth of field higher, which is the F value, like the 22, which you see the one below, everything comes in focus. Now, if you're going to take a huge area, a scenery, and you don't want the sun to become blurry, you just want to showcase everything which is there in layers, like the tree, the mountain, the clouds, the sun, everything is in focus. So you increase the F value, which is the aperture, and so you have more of the objects in the frame coming in focus. Now, if you're going to use this idea while taking cakes, you want all your set of like say 5 to 6 cupcakes that you've arranged in rows, everything, it should come in focus, then you increase the F value. But when you have to take a picture of the cupcake where you want only the front of the cupcake coming in focus and the cupcakes at the back, you want them to be blurry, then decrease the aperture value. And the aperture mainly is useful when we are taking pictures of the deserts, when we are looking at the elements of the props that are behind the subject to become blurry, and that is when we get the aperture useful. Okay, so this is the exposure triangle, and this is very important to have all the three coming together to be able to take a beautiful or better picture using the DSLR. Okay, so now let's read a little more about the aperture or the f value. Okay, so it controls the amount of light coming in through the lens opening that we know. Okay, so the lesser the value of the f, and then you see the lens opening is bigger, you can see the image at the bottom. When there is the f 1.4, the lens is like really open wide, and the boy or that man image that is there in the pictorial representation, you can see that is completely in focus and the background is completely blurred. So the lower the value of the f value, you know that the subject is going to be super sharp and the back is just going to become blurry. So depending on how much blur you want the object that is behind the subject to get blurred, then you adjust the f value accordingly. Okay, so the lesser the value of f, the bigger the lens opening. And what happens when the lens opening is bigger? So the bigger the lens opening, then you have more light coming into the lens, and then the depth of field gets shallower that you can see there, and then more background gets blurred in the image. And that is what we are looking at, having the f value that is lower. And then in this image, you can see as the f value increases, slowly the background is getting a little more clearer and clearer, and you can see the f22, you can see the mountain itself a little more clearly, and the 32 is like super sharp. And depending on the lens that you're using, you will be able to adjust your f value anywhere between 4 to 15 or even maybe 22 depending on the lens, and the f 1.4, f 2.8 or anywhere between that. The lower f value, the aperture, comes with the specific lenses, you call them macro lenses, and that are specifically used for food photography. Okay, now coming on to the shutter speed. The shutter speed, which means, you know, the amount of time it takes to open and then close the lens, right? So the shutter speed here controls the amount of time the light is let through the lens, and the lesser the shutter speed, which means the denominator will be more. Now, in our case, 1/1000 is the lowest shutter speed that we are shown in the image here. Now, which means the denominator, as it goes higher, the shutter speed is also lesser. Now, when you have the shutter speed lesser, what happens? The faster is the time taken to click. The shutter open and closing time is quite faster, like, you know, very fraction of a second is what it will take when you have a 1/1000. You can also see when it just clicks, you know that the clicking sound happens like in a fraction of a second. And you also know when you increase the shutter speed, when you click, you know, there is the two sounds coming with a longer period of time, which is like clearly very exposed to us. We can understand when the shutter speed is less or more when you're clicking itself. Now, when there is this lesser time allowed for the light coming through the lens, so not too much light can pass in when the shutter speed is very less, and that is what we need to understand. So when do we need to not allow too much light to come in? Which is when we are going to freeze the moving objects in the image, like jumping, running, moving car, waterfalls, or a train that is running, and then you want to capture that running train and without it being blurry, and that is when you decrease the shutter speed, which is like somewhere around at 1/1000, or if your camera allows any lesser, you do that, and to be able to click something running and then you want to capture and freeze that movement, and that is when you increase the shutter speed, which means lesser light is passing through. Now, when it comes to us for cake photography, how does it affect? When we are going to keep it in a static place, and if it is a darker place, now here is an example of how the shutter speed is going to affect a static image. Now, this is around picture taken around like say 5:30 to 6 p.m. in the evening, where there is not too much light coming in through at that point of time. Now, when you have the shutter speed, here are examples in which there's no editing happened on this images that are shown here. Now you can see that the camera is allowed on a 1/100 itself. It is like looking pitch dark. So I didn't go any lesser than that. So from the 1/100, you can see a 1/50 and 1/15, 1/8, 1/4, and 1/1/3. Now, when the value, the denominator decreases, the shutter speed is increased, allowing more light to pass through. So when more light is allowed to pass through, what happens? The static image, it will look like it is in a brighter place because we are allowing more light to pass through by increasing the opening and the closing time. That difference time between the opening and the closing of the shutter thing, we have increased, allowing more time. So for us, when we use the shutter speed, we have to be increasing the shutter speed when we know that the place is darker and we want the cake to become brighter. Now, when you are in a well-lit place and at that time you don't want to increase the shutter speed, you can keep it in a value that gives you a brighter image. Now, when you know that the cake is pretty bleaching and there is too much light, then you have to decrease the shutter speed because you want the shutter to open and close quickly, not allowing too much light. So now we have just come to the ISO, which is the last one in the exposure triangle. So we just read through. The ISO is the level of sensitivity of your camera to the available light. Okay. So now you have to use higher ISO when there is low light. And when there is the daytime and the light is pretty good, then you stick to the base ISO. The ones recommended are 200 for the Nikon camera and 100 for the Canon camera. And also what you need to understand about ISO is when you have higher ISO and the sensitivity of the camera increases, and that will give a lot of grains or the noise in the image. So keep the ISO at the base value and play around with the other two, which is the aperture and the shutter speed, allowing enough light for your cake that you want to look like, whether it is like a really brighter picture or you just want it in a gray BG, you don't want it too bright and all that. So keep the ISO in one place, okay, and change your depth of field and the shutter speed to be able to have a greater looking picture by taking the photos using your DSLR camera. So I'm going to now teach you how to use a DSLR and then take the pictures of the cake. I have a beautiful pink buttercream cake with the palette knife petals around in the color of ivory. Now for this, the gray BG is just going to pop out the color of the cake. So choosing the BG for the color of the cake is a very important thing. So right now I have the cam, and that is a Nikon 3200D cam, and the lens, it is a 50mm macro lens. So I will not be able to zoom using this lens, but I like the quality of the picture that I get with this 50mm lens. Okay, so now if I have to go near and take a close-up shot, I can't zoom, so I have to actually go closer to the cake, physically move the camera and myself to the cake to take the close-up pictures. So right now we are going to take all the three angles, right? And so the first angle is the eye level. So we know the eye level, you need to keep the camera. So because you can't zoom in or zoom out, I'm just stepping backwards. Okay. Now for taking the eye level picture, your camera's lens, like I said, has to be parallel. Now this is the space, the height of the cake, and then the camera has to be parallel, and the position, you don't have to keep it taller than the cake or even very low. You have to manage it in such a way that you have the frame, the cake in the middle, you have space around on the left and the right, and then on the top as well. So I have just clicked the picture. You can see the image, I've just made it in auto focus. Okay, so I don't have to manually focus, and that is like too technical to be knowing to take a cake photography. So I usually set it in the auto focus. Now, so the cake is in the elements on the cake, especially the palette knife petals, are like really very crisp and beautiful. They are in focus, and you can see the BG is blurry. So I have set the ISO to 800 and the aperture to 8 and the shutter speed is 100. Okay, so now you could hold your camera for a portrait image like that, or if you want it to be in this frame, again you hold the camera in the level of the cake and have more space above the cake and lesser space below the cake and then do a click. Okay, so here's a picture of this frame. In this frame, you're going to have more space above the cake, and if there's too much, you could crop it, but try and avoid having more space below the cake, and that is not going to give you the right angle. Okay. Now, the eye level pictures are done, and for the bird eye. Now, I said for the eye level, you're holding the camera parallel to the sides of the cake. Now, for the bird eye, you lift the camera up and then you tilt the camera, and like I said, you need to have space, equal visibility for the sides and the top of the cake. And in this, if you're not able to see the complete cake stand, is quite fine, but what we are trying to capture here is the visibility, the work that is done on the sides as well and then on the top as well. Okay, so I'm just going to get a little closer to the cake, and if you have the lens that which you could zoom in, you could do that by staying in the same place that you are, but you have to just focus on the angle in which I am holding the camera, and that will be the bird eye. That is very important for you to observe at this point of time, to see the angle in which I am holding. Let me just hold this on the right hand so you can just clearly see the lens's angle. So, holding at this angle, I am able to see visibly the equal spacing taken by the top and the sides. Okay. So, that is the bird eye. Now, for the dead top, if you are holding a cam and then if the cake is on a cake stand again, and if you have to hold it on top, you may not be able to see. If you do not have the screen on the camera that you could just tilt and see, in this I do not have that option. In case if you had that, you could just tilt it to see what you are able to see through the lens. If you do not have that, then you might have to put a chair here and then get up on top of the chair to go up above the cake to take the top. Now, I am just going to click, just hold it, assuming that this spacing is enough, just go in and then take a dead top. Now, you can see the dead top has covered the top in a full circle and have good amount of space all around as well. As long as you have a good amount of space all around the top in the dead top angle, if there is excess on one side, you could any day crop, but then have equal spacing all around the cake in a dead top. So, now once you have the raw files in the camera, then you could edit them later on, giving that we will be seeing in the further lessons. Now, the fourth angle that I was talking about was to have a bird eye, but just 3/4 of the cake. So, that will be a bit in focus. You will go closer, okay, and not take the entire cake, but just 3/4, and that will be an additional angle that you can take. Another angle that you can still go close, but then have it at the eye level, but don't take the full cake's picture, but just one side. It all depends on what kind of work you have done on your cake, and if you have some beautiful decorations that you have done on the side, then a close-up side shot in eye level and then the bird eye will be an important element. Now, if you have to again move towards each petal, because it is an autofocus, I am just able to get a little close. If you have to, want to take even further close-up shots of the work you have done, you just get a little more closer, so you can show in your picture the petals and how they are done. Okay, so these are the most important angles: the eye level, the bird eye and the dead top. The first most important ones, and then the two close-ups of the bird eye and the eye level getting a little closer and showing just one part of the cake, and then even getting closer for taking the elements in complete close-up. Okay, so in the next lesson, I'm going to show you how to take the pictures using the mobile phone camera.